The 2011 is held up by many as being the king of semi-automatic handguns, and the 2011 is my favorite platform of handgun. So what does that mean when I say it's becoming irrelevant? They're soft shooting, they have nearly infinite possibilities to customize, and they have, without a doubt, the best trigger action for a handgun. But it's an updated design based on a very old design. So what I think is going to happen is we're going to look back on the 2011s of this era, and they're going to be remembered as being great for the time, but ultimately, in the words of a very wise philosopher, they're so 2000 and late. You didn't think you were going to get hit with a Fergie Ferg reference, but here we are. So what's funny about this is about a week ago, I started kind of thinking about notes on a video like this about kind of how the 2011 is evolving and changing. And just yesterday, the staccato new version of the gun, the P4.5, 445, I don't even know what they're calling it. The new staccato gun that's going to be released at SHOT Show this year was leaked onto the internet, and no, that's not a bad rendering or something like that. Apparently somebody was able to crawl the staccato site and find the image that wasn't secured, so now we know what it is. And this really isn't just about staccatos, it's really more about the idea of the 2011 pistol, not as staccato makes them, but kind of like Kleenex is universal for what a tissue is. That's what we're talking about here. And before I can defend that statement, we have to talk about how kind of the birth of the 2011 got its roots from sport shooting with 1911s. So a quick history lesson, that we'll get into the current state of the market, and then we'll talk about what I think is going to happen. And I'm going to put an idea, and you can kind of disagree with it, although the onus is going to be on you to prove it in the comments. But when there is an idea that is good enough that both the high-speed performance shooters and the high-speed door kicker types agree on, the rest of the consumer market ultimately catches up, I don't know, 10 to 15 years later. And with all of the modern popular handguns that weren't pushed through, exorbitant marketing dollars, generally that's the case, and that's what you see with the 2011 pistol. So to set the stage, going back into 1976, that's when the International Practical Shooting Confederation got started. Now, back in the day, they only had basically two platforms to compete with. They had the mighty 1911 Win 45 ACP, and they had the Browning High Powers in 9mm. Back in the day, the 45, which was making major power factor, was rewarded with more points for scoring because it took less rounds. It had 7 or 8 round magazines, whereas the high power was doing, 13 to 15 rounds, whatever the magazines were back in those days. And that is where kind of this whole cottage industry of 1911 Smiths kind of spun up, and people were kind of accurizing and, doing reliability tunes on clapped out old GI models of 1911s. And what we saw is the feature set absolutely exploded as a result. What we look at on a 1911 today is the lower and flared ejection port. That was originally an aftermarket kind of thing. The ramped 1911 barrel is another thing that kind of came out of that era. And as a result of people trying to take a platform that was really awesome when you got it working and do sport shooting with it, we saw a lot of features and enhancements that we were the beneficiaries of today. But at some point along the way, somebody said, you know what would be awesome? Is if we had these 1911s and we had more rounds. If we could take the scoring advantage of the 45 and have the same capacity as the high power guys, that would be kind of the best of both worlds. So enter the Para and Caspian frame. So what the Para and Caspian frames were basically a frame for a 1911 style gun that took different magazines, and you were able to get 13 or 14 rounds of 45 in a sliding single action gun with a superior trigger to the high powers. This kind of was the first point at which we had two different styles of magazines. The Para frames took the Para magazine, which Bull Armory kind of uses today, and the Caspian frames took basically large frame Tanfoglio magazines. There was no consensus on what the magazine should be. Now, there's a lot more that went on at the time than just kind of adding a bunch of, capacity to the platform. And YouTube, when I say that, these are manufactured guns. This is a history lesson. This is not modifying any of these guns. These are all from the factory. But anyway, there was a lot of advancement in what the guns could and should be to score maximum points per second. Now, fast forward to Texas in roughly the early 90s, and there was Virgil Tripp with Tripp Research Inc. Eventually teamed up with Sandy Strayer, and they formed STI. Tripp Research became STI, and STI took the concept of a modular 1911 frame that you could bolt a grip on with a high capacity magazine, and thus the 2011 was born, originally from STI, which was Strayer Trip International. Yes, that's what it meant. And Sandy Strayer is the same Strayer of Strayer Voigt Inc., or SVI, or as we call them, Infinity. Now, there is some stuff about what the original pattern of a 2011 was. It was a bull barrel gun on a steel frame with a polymer grip that bolts on a big honkin' magwell. Single action trigger, obviously. They originally had kind of target sights like the LPA style sights, because back in those days, iron sights were kind of king. So the 2011, as we think of it now, came out in kind of that 93, 94 sort of time frame. Now, you notice I'm holding up a gun with a red dot mounted, and you're thinking, well, back in the day, they shot irons. No, not exactly. In the 1990 USPSA National Championship, Jerry Barnhart showed up with a red dot scope mounted onto a 1911 pistol and beat the crap out of everybody. That is what started the genesis, which ultimately led us to open division and guns that look like these absolute space blasters. And it wasn't the military that did it, it was competitive shooters. Since the 2011 was introduced, the kind of what we think of as a 2011 today, this kind of format of the enthusiast 2011 sort of took root, and really what that comes down to is machining got a lot better. Small companies that couldn't afford to pay to get polymer grips made started positioning the aluminum grips that they could machine in-house as being kind of superior. In some ways they are, in some ways they're not. And you get guns that look like this, which are what people think of today as being kind of the, you know, nice 2011 sort of gun. And that would be true if I were filming this video in 2022, because really what started happening is we started moving away from the awesomeness that is the 2011 kind of very slowly, and now it's starting to kind of accelerate. And what do I mean by that? The 2011 design has vestiges left over from kind of back in the day. The 2011 magazine is actually a double stack 45 magazine. The length of the magazine tube is built around the 45 ACP cartridge. It takes two of those bad boys. And the problem with this magazine is it makes people with small hands not be able to grip the very large grip that comes on the 2011 pistols. There's a bunch of different triggers you can put in 2011s, and even the short triggers, people with small hands sometimes just have a problem managing the trigger. The other big problem, and it's true on, and you can probably see it better on the stainless gun, is the 1911 has an internal extractor design. This is not the original extractor design. When Browning originally came up with the 1911 pistol, it had an external extractor at the request of the Army. They moved to an internal extractor because the thought from the Army was that if the soldier could mess with the extractor, they would. So we need to put it where they can't get at it. And this is good and bad, mostly bad, and we're gonna get there. So jumping back into kind of the mid-teens, if you think about Wilson Combat, they introduced their double stack pistol, the EDC X9. And the EDC X9 takes a lot of cues from the 1911 pistol, but it leaves behind some stuff. Notably, it has no grip safety and it has an external extractor, but more importantly, it's built around a proper 9mm magazine, which means the grips can be much smaller, more compact, so more shooters can find home on the pistol. You can generally make a large-handed shooter fit on a pistol through, you know, different grips, but you can't make a big gun fit for people with small hands. So Wilson Combat, who is a 1911 Smith and could no longer ignore the fact that people wanted more capacity and didn't want 1911s anymore, entered the market with their gun. Now, that all said, this isn't a Wilson Combat. This is the Kimber KDS-9C, which basically copied Wilson Combat's homework, more or less, and you know, has a lot of the same sort of features out of the gun. Aluminum frame. It's kind of like the Para-Caspian frame, where it is a, you know, single frame that takes the magazine. You can't swap out the frame or grip frame. You can only swap out the attachable grips. So that's kind of what Wilson Combat kind of came to the market with. And in 2023, we started to see some more divergence. First and foremost, Staccato, to their credit, introduced the CS lineup of pistols, which was a smaller external extractor built around a 9mm magazine, but generally was taking what the 2011 formula was and applying it to a different magazine. But at the same time, we saw that the OA Defense 2311 was launched. And what the 2311 was basically a polymer frame version of the Wilson Combat sort of thing. It was built around the P320 magazine, got rid of the grip safety, and is more of a concentration on, you know, red dot sights with a bunch of optics plates 4 red dots, stuff like that, but was the single action gun with a ton of features. And, you know, this was the buzz of the 2023 SHOT Show. But also quietly at SHOT Show, and I would say that this company sort of made a splash in a way that the other ones sort of didn't, because we're starting to see people copying their design and not the ones I just spoke about, was Stealth Arms, which was a 1911 builder, introduced the Platypus, which basically is a Glock Mag 1911. Now, it's similar to the Wilson Combat and the Kimber KDS-9, has an aluminum frame, so the actual, like, this is all of the gun, doesn't have removable grips or anything like that, but it has all of the same controls as a 1911, but it takes Glock mags. The other cool thing is you could spell out how you wanted all the Cerakote done on the pistol, so the pistol that shows up is truly unique and truly yours. This was my original one from 2023, and I think was a contributing factor to why the orders went from assembled in about 4 weeks to taking, you know, 6+ months, which I think was kind of a signal to the market that people wanted a 9mm magazine on a super high-end, you know, gun that was fit, very finely manufactured sort of thing. And we've started to see clones of the Platypus start to show up. And you fast forward to 2024 and Fusion Firearms, another 1911 builder, has teamed up with Airmox out of Turkey to bring us the Fusion XP Pro, which is much more closer to kind of the 2011 formula. It is a steel frame with a modular aluminum grip that bolts on, but it takes Glock mags. So I think consumers and manufacturers are starting to agree that a 9mm magazine is probably more desirable than the double stack 45 magazine that is the 2011 mag. Now, also in 2024, Kimber finally entered the high cap 2011 space with their 2K11 pistol. And there's a lot of notable sort of departures from what kind of the emblem of the 2011 is, but specifically you'll notice the external extractor there being kind of the most notable departure. And it still takes 2011 mags. What we're starting to see is that the manufacturers are kind of getting away from what the tried and true formula of the 2011 is. And that was kind of solidified when Live Free Armory just this week, in the first week of 2025, announced their Apollo 11 compact subcomp. I don't know what they're calling it. They're calling it this. But what you'll notice on that gun is it also has an external extractor. So I sent Colby, the Hefe over at Live Free Armory, an email coming up on SHOT Show saying, hey, I think it's really cool that you used external extractors. And in his email response, he's like, yeah, we noticed that the external extractors are way, way, way more reliable and they don't require tuning. Now, previously inexpensive 2011s had extraction issues, and it almost always comes down to how the internal extractor is tuned, and the internal extractor represents a maintenance point that you have to clean out with a 22 Jag. If you've never pulled your extractor and run a 22 Jag through it and you have tens of thousands of rounds on it, you should check it out. It's satisfying in the way popping a pimple is satisfying. It's disgusting. So this brings us back to the Staccato P4.5, and also part of the leak was the description, and I'll read it to you now. The Staccato HD line is an entirely new family of pistols, designed with feedback from our elite professional end users. HD pistols remain true to our heritage while being the most technologically advanced, thoroughly tested version of the 2011 platform to date. A complete ergonomics overhaul, new optics mounting system, improved recoil system, and active firing pin block provide a combination of durability and shootability only available in the world's best shooting handgun. Built on the same frame and slide as the P4, the P4.5 HD is built for performance. Its 4.5-inch sight block design increases barrel length and adds non-reciprocating mass at the muzzle to enhance accuracy and shootability. Utilizing the short slide of the P4 maintains the fast cycle speed for increased reliability and quick, consistent recoil impulse with less muzzle rise. So at this point, we're on at least the third owner of Staccato, which previously was STI. They took STI, they renamed it Staccato, and now we have this. Staccato repositioned what was originally a gamer gun into a duty gun through better machining, better processes, were able to make them more reliable. Back in the day, the STI edges were kind of a starting point for 2011. You would buy one and expect to have to work on it to make it be reliable and be what you wanted it to be. Now these things more or less work out of the box. Now what's notable about the P4.5 is it sounds like it's going to take Glock magazines, so they kind of copied the homework of Stealth Arms and the Fusion and all that kind of stuff. Similarly, they also have an irons forward optic system like the 2311 from OA Defense. The gun, with where the irons are located on it, is set up for a red dot shooter. It's not set up for irons, and that's kind of cool because the 2011 market is very much a flex bro market. Like, it's for enthusiasts, it's people who want to flex, all that kind of stuff. It's expensive kind of by design, and most people who fall into that bucket usually shoot red dots. And if you're one of the few dozen people left who still insist that you should learn how to shoot irons and you can do all the same things with irons, I'm running out of crayons to convince you that red dots are a performance upgrade. But at the same time, it doesn't matter because in a few years, they're just not going to make pistols that are intended to be shot with iron sights. You can reference my video with the CEO of Sig Sauer, where he says 50% of law enforcement was shipping guns with red dots already on them, and I think that's as of 2023. Red dots are going to be the aiming solution for pistols in the same way they are for rifles in short order. You can always go shoot revolvers or classic 1911s. But back to the Staccato P4.5, the 18-round magazine is likely going to be the new Mekgar Glock magazine that's been rumored and talked about. Mekgar loves making 17-round magazines take 18 rounds, so that's probably the magazine those guns are going to ship with. We'll find out in a couple weeks. So back to kind of the point of the video, now that you know the state of play and you know the history of how we got here, what is going to happen going forward? It's both a good thing and a terrible thing of kind of where we're going. It's going to be very much like the red dot market. Talking about the good is we're going to get pistols that are more ergonomic, more shootable, more concepted around being shot with red dots, just generally more capable pistols. Bad side is much like red dots, we're going to have a plethora of footprints that nobody agrees on. None of the holsters are going to match. There's going to be a whole slew of magazines and there won't be any commonality as we kind of figure out, you know, what magazine. And realistically, 9mm magazines are so easy to make well that they're probably like the genie's out of the bottle. It's going to be just a bevy of magazines and there won't be, you know, the 2011 commonality that we've all sort of enjoyed. Does that mean that 2011s are going to immediately become sort of invalidated and stop being functional? Absolutely not. The 2011 sort of 2.0, as I'll call it, which is a 9mm red dot optic 2011, is going to be viable for kind of the foreseeable future, but there are a couple things to consider. If you think about the 2011 1.0, which was a 40 Smith & Wesson with really good target iron sights, that gun is basically dead. People who are sitting on a bunch of those old guns have a hard time selling them in the secondary market because nobody wants a 40 Smith & Wesson, and people with that kind of four-figure gun money don't want a gun that doesn't have a red dot capability. So these guns are going to continue to be really nice kind of Cadillac shooting experiences into the future foreseeably. People who are already shooting and enjoying the guns will continue to do so. It won't be a problem. Whatever the new emblem is that comes out and becomes the new Flex Pro thing, people who come into the sport or are early adopters will move to that. So you won't see a ton of participation drop on this gun, but you'll see the people coming into it start picking up the new thing. And what will end up happening is there'll be fewer and fewer people year after year who are still continuing to do this as this one continues to gain momentum. This will erode for, I don't know, 4 to 5 years, and then it will collapse and the new thing will be installed. These will still be super functional. There's a ton of mags floating around. You know, it'll still be something you can probably leave to your kids if you wanted to. And we've seen this happen in sport shooting in a couple different ways. There is IDPA and USPSA when they introduced carry optics division. That's absolutely what happened. All the visionaries and early adopters went to the division immediately, but all of the people coming into the sport came into that division. The legacy divisions just started eroding, and then a couple of them collapsed. We're seeing it happen in USPSA in real time right now with the adoption of, this is a limited optics gun for USPSA effectively. In the first year limited optics was introduced, it eclipsed carry optics almost with participation. But when you show up to matches and you see the guns in the new guys' holsters, a lot of them are showing up with this style of gun and not the traditional carry optics gun. So we're seeing that already sort of happen. Very successful division. It's going to erode slowly and then it'll eventually collapse, and this will be kind of the new division. It would take somebody introducing a new caliber to replace 9mm and like a new, something really disruptive like a new sighting solution. If these guns can't handle whatever the new sighting solution that makes shooting easier is, that's when they're going to fall out of vogue, so to speak. So back to kind of the original point of the beginning of the video, I do think that people are going to look at these guns much like they look at Caspian guns and old 2011s, sort of back in the day. They're awesome, capable guns. It's just that they had their moment in history and we're kind of moving on from it now. It may be 10 to 20 years in the future, because what ends up happening is if somebody comes in with a patent, they've got about 18 years of prosperity as they print a bunch of guns that everybody wants to buy, and then that patent expires, and like we saw when the Glock patent expired, then everybody and their brother starts making basically the same gun. So that all said, I don't know what we're going to see at SHOT Show. We'll see what happens. I'm excited to see innovation starting to come into the 2011 space as everybody sort of all at once figured out how to manufacture them to a price point that most end users could afford. They're still expensive, but they're less expensive than kind of they were. I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think about this. As always, I appreciate you guys. I'll catch you on the next one.